On this sweltering evening of July 15, 2006, 17-year-old Marcus Tyler Thompson vanished without a trace from the Brazos County Rodeo in Bryan, Texas. 18 years later, when his photograph appeared on a promotional flyer for a Las Vegas casino, it would finally unravel one of Texas's most baffling missing persons cases and reveal a truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Marcus Thompson was the kind of teenager who seemed destined for greatness. Standing 6 feet tall with sandy brown hair and bright blue eyes, he was the star quarterback of Bryan High School's football team, an honor roll student with a full scholarship to Texas A&M University, and the pride of his tight-knit family. His father, Robert Thompson, owned a successful cattle ranch outside Bryan, while his mother, Linda, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. The Thompson family had deep roots in Brazos County, dating back 4 generations to when Marcus's great-great-grandfather had first settled the land in the 1890s. The annual Brazos County Rodeo wasn't just entertainment for the Thompsons. It was a family tradition, a celebration of their heritage, and a cornerstone of their community involvement. Marcus had been attending the rodeo since he was old enough to walk. As a child, he'd won numerous ribbons in youth competitions, and as a teenager, he'd volunteered as a junior wrangler, helping to manage livestock and assist with event preparations. The 2006 rodeo was particularly special because Marcus was scheduled to compete in the bull riding competition for the first time, having finally convinced his parents to let him try the dangerous sport he'd been dreaming about for years. Marcus had been begging us to let him ride bulls since he was 14, Robert Thompson would later tell investigators. We kept saying he was too young, too inexperienced, but he was 17, about to graduate, heading to college on a football scholarship. We figured if we were ever going to let him try it, this was the time. The Brazos County Rodeo was a major event that drew participants and spectators from across East Texas. Held annually at the Brazos County Fairgrounds, the 4-day event featured professional rodeo competitions, carnival rides, live music, and enough barbecue and beer to satisfy the appetites of the thousands of people who attended each year. The 2006 rodeo had attracted its largest crowd ever, nearly 15,000 people over the 4-day weekend. The Saturday evening session, when Marcus disappeared, was the most popular, featuring the championship rounds in all major events and culminating in the bull riding competition that Marcus was scheduled to participate in. Marcus had arrived at the fairgrounds early that Saturday morning with his family. They'd set up their traditional spot in the parking area reserved for competitors and volunteers, where Robert's pickup truck and horse trailer created a small base camp complete with folding chairs, coolers, and the family's portable grill. Marcus was so excited that morning, Linda Thompson recalled. He'd been up since 5 a.m., checking and rechecking his equipment, practicing his grip, visualizing his ride. He kept saying it was going to be the best day of his life. The bull riding competition was scheduled for 8:30 p.m., but Marcus had spent the entire day at the fairgrounds, helping with setup, watching other events, and getting advice from experienced bull riders who'd taken the promising young athlete under their wing. Around 6 p.m., Marcus had dinner with his family at their truck. His parents noticed he seemed more nervous than excited as the competition approached, but that was natural for someone about to attempt bull riding for the first time. After dinner, Marcus excused himself to begin his pre-competition preparations. He said he wanted to go check on the bulls, get a feel for which one he might draw, and do some final mental preparation, Robert Thompson explained. We told him to be back by 8 so we could walk to the arena together. That was the last time Marcus's parents saw their son alive. When 8 p.m. arrived and Marcus hadn't returned to the family truck, Robert and Linda initially weren't concerned. They assumed he was probably at the contestant area behind the arena, getting ready for his event. They walked to the arena and took their seats in the grandstand, expecting to see Marcus emerge with the other bull riders when the competition began. But when the announcer called the names of the evening's bull riding competitors at 8:25 p.m., Marcus Thompson's name wasn't on the list. Robert immediately left the grandstand and went to the contestant staging area behind the arena to look for his son. I found the rodeo coordinator, a guy named Bill Morrison, who'd known our family for years, Robert recalled. I asked him where Marcus was, and Bill looked confused. He said Marcus had never checked in for the competition. This was the first indication that something was seriously wrong. Bull riding contestants were required to check in at the contestant area at least 30 minutes before their event to confirm their participation, receive their competitor number, and review safety procedures. Marcus, who was notoriously punctual and responsible, would never have missed such an important deadline. Robert and Bill Morrison immediately began searching the fairgrounds for Marcus. They checked the livestock pens where the bulls were kept, thinking Marcus might have gone there to study his potential rides. They searched the midway, the food vendors, the beer gardens, and every building on the fairgrounds. They asked other competitors, carnival workers, and rodeo staff if anyone had seen Marcus in the past 2 hours. No one had. By 9:30 p.m., with the bull riding competition already underway and still no sign of Marcus, the Thompson family made the decision to call the Brazos County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Sarah Martinez was the first law enforcement officer to respond to the scene. When I arrived at the fairgrounds around 10:01 p.m., I immediately recognized this wasn't a typical missing teenager situation. Deputy Martinez later testified. Marcus Thompson was well known in the community, had no history of running away or irresponsible behavior, and had been genuinely excited about competing that evening. There was no logical reason for him to simply disappear. Deputy Martinez organized an immediate search of the fairgrounds involving rodeo staff, volunteers, and other law enforcement officers who were working security for the event. The search was systematic and thorough, covering every building, vehicle, trailer, and piece of equipment on the 200-acre fairgrounds. The search revealed Marcus's first concerning clue. His equipment bag, containing his bull riding gear, was found abandoned behind the main livestock barn, approximately 300 yards from where he'd last been seen. The bag contained his protective vest, helmet, rosin, gloves, and rope. Everything he would have needed for his competition. Finding that equipment bag was when we knew something bad had happened, Robert Thompson said. Marcus would never have abandoned his gear voluntarily. He'd been planning this competition for months, and that equipment represented everything he'd been working toward. More troubling was the condition of the equipment bag. While it contained all of Marcus's gear, it appeared to have been hastily packed, with items stuffed inside rather than carefully organized as Marcus typically arranged his equipment. Additionally, there were dirt stains and grass marks on the bag that suggested it had been dropped or dragged across the ground. The search of the fairgrounds continued until 2 a.m. on Sunday morning, involving more than 50 people and covering every accessible area of the property. No additional evidence related to Marcus's disappearance was discovered, and no witnesses came forward with information about seeing him after 6 p.m. on Saturday. Sheriff Jim Wheeler, a 30-year veteran of Texas law enforcement, was called to the scene at midnight to take personal charge of the investigation. Wheeler had known the Thompson family for years and understood immediately that this case was unlike typical teenage disappearances. Marcus Thompson was not the kind of kid who would run away from home or skip out on a major commitment, Sheriff Wheeler explained. He was 2 weeks away from starting summer practice with the Texas A&M football team. He had a girlfriend he was crazy about, a loving family, and a bright future ahead of him. There was absolutely no reason for him to disappear voluntarily. The initial investigation focused on the possibility that Marcus had suffered an accident somewhere on the fairgrounds. The property included several areas that could be dangerous after dark: irrigation ditches, equipment storage areas with heavy machinery, and livestock pens containing large animals. Sunday morning brought a massive, organized search effort involving over 200 volunteers from the local community. The search teams included members of the Bryan Fire Department, Texas A&M University Search and Rescue Volunteers, mounted patrol units from the Sheriff's Department, and dozens of local ranchers with their horses and ATVs. The search expanded beyond the fairgrounds to include the surrounding rural areas. Teams systematically covered pastures, wooded areas, farm buildings, and any location where Marcus might have wandered or been taken. Bloodhounds were brought in to try to track Marcus's scent from the location where his equipment bag had been found. The bloodhounds detected Marcus's scent trail leading from the equipment bag location toward the parking area, but the trail disappeared near the main entrance to the fairgrounds. This suggested that Marcus had either gotten into a vehicle at that location or that his scent trail had been contaminated by the thousands of people who had passed through the area during the rodeo. The fact that the scent trail led to the parking area and then disappeared was significant, explained K-9 handler Detective Ray Collins. It strongly suggested that Marcus had left the fairgrounds in a vehicle, either voluntarily or involuntarily. This discovery shifted the investigation's focus from a possible accident to a potential abduction or voluntary departure. Investigators began reviewing security footage from businesses near the fairgrounds and interviewing people who had been in the parking area during the critical time period between 6 and 8:30 p.m. on Saturday. The Brazos County Fairgrounds had limited security camera coverage in 2006, with only 2 cameras monitoring the main entrance and ticket booth area. Review of this footage showed Marcus entering the fairgrounds with his family that morning, but the cameras didn't capture the parking area where his scent trail had ended. However, investigators did discover something concerning in the footage. A white panel van with no visible license plates had been parked near the main entrance for several hours on Saturday afternoon and evening. The van appeared in footage from 2 p.m. until approximately 8:45 p.m. But the image quality was too poor to identify the driver or any other occupants. The timing of that van's presence was suspicious, Sheriff Wheeler noted. It arrived several hours before Marcus disappeared and left shortly after we would have expected him to report for his bull riding competition. Attempts to identify the van through local DMV records and inquiries with fairgrounds vendors proved unsuccessful. None of the registered vendors or contractors for the rodeo owned a vehicle matching that description, and no one could provide information about who might have been operating it. The investigation expanded to include a thorough background check on Marcus himself, looking for any factors that might explain his disappearance. Investigators interviewed his girlfriend, Jessica Martinez, no relation to Deputy Martinez, his teammates from the football team, his teachers, and anyone else who had regular contact with him. All interviews painted the same picture. Marcus was a well-adjusted, popular, responsible teenager with no known enemies, no involvement with drugs or alcohol, no financial problems, and no romantic conflicts that might have motivated him to run away or put him in danger. "Everyone loved Marcus," said Jessica Martinez, who had been dating him for 8 months. "He was kind, funny, ambitious, and completely devoted to his family and his future plans. The idea that he would just disappear without telling anyone is impossible to believe." Marcus's academic records showed a student with a 3.8 GPA who had never been in trouble with school authorities. His football coaches described him as a natural leader who was respected by his teammates and completely committed to the sport. His employer at a local feed store, where Marcus worked part-time, said he was the most reliable teenage employee they'd ever had. "We looked for any red flags, any signs of problems in Marcus's life that might explain his disappearance," Detective Lisa Wong, who was assigned as the lead investigator on the case, explained. "We found absolutely nothing. If anything, Marcus seemed to have an unusually stable and positive life for a teenager." 1 week after Marcus's disappearance, The investigation took on a more ominous tone when the FBI was called in to assist with the case. The involvement of federal authorities reflected both the mysterious nature of the disappearance and the possibility that Marcus might have been taken across state lines. Special Agent Catherine Ross, who specialized in crimes against children and missing persons cases, took charge of coordinating the federal investigation. Agent Ross brought additional resources to the case, including advanced forensic analysis capabilities and access to national databases of missing persons and criminal activity. The Marcus Thompson case had several characteristics that made federal involvement appropriate. Agent Ross explained in a later interview, a minor had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. There was evidence suggesting he might have left the immediate area in a vehicle, and local law enforcement had exhausted their initial investigative leads. The FBI's involvement brought new investigative techniques to the case. Agents conducted polygraph examinations of family members and close friends, all of whom passed, analyzed Marcus's computer and cell phone records for any suspicious communications, and expanded the search for the mysterious white van to include surrounding states. The analysis of Marcus's electronic communications revealed nothing suspicious. His email account contained typical teenage correspondence with friends and college recruiters. His cell phone records showed normal usage patterns, with no unusual contacts or communications in the days leading up to his disappearance. However, one detail from Marcus's phone records would later prove significant. His cell phone had been turned off or destroyed at approximately 8:20 p.m. on Saturday, July 15th, exactly the time when he should have been checking in for the bull riding competition. The timing of the phone going dark was too coincidental to ignore, Agent Ross noted. It suggested that Marcus's disappearance was not spontaneous, but was orchestrated by someone who understood the importance of eliminating electronic tracking capabilities. 2 months after Marcus's disappearance, the investigation had generated over 1,500 tips from the public, followed up on 200 potential sightings across Texas and neighboring states, and consumed thousands of hours of law enforcement time. Despite these extensive efforts, investigators were no closer to determining what had happened to Marcus Thompson. The case attracted significant media attention throughout Texas and beyond. America's Most Wanted featured Marcus's disappearance in a segment that aired in October 2006, generating hundreds of additional tips but no breakthrough leads. Local television stations and newspapers covered every development in the case, keeping Marcus's story in the public eye. The Thompson family established a reward fund that eventually grew to $50,000 for information leading to Marcus's safe return or the identification of those responsible for his disappearance. The reward was funded by contributions from the local community, Marcus's future teammates at Texas A&M, and strangers across the country who had been moved by his story. We never stopped believing that Marcus was alive and that someone, somewhere, knew what had happened to him, Linda Thompson said during a press conference marking the first anniversary of her son's disappearance. We were determined to keep his story alive until we found answers. Despite the family's determination and the continued efforts of law enforcement, the case gradually went cold. By 2008, 2 years after Marcus's disappearance, active investigation had been reduced to following up on occasional tips and leads. The case remained officially open, but resources had been redirected to more recent crimes and missing persons cases. The impact of Marcus's disappearance on his family and community was profound and lasting. Robert and Linda Thompson became advocates for missing children, working with organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to help other families facing similar situations. The annual Brazos County Rodeo established a memorial scholarship in Marcus's name for local students pursuing higher education. Jessica Martinez, Marcus's girlfriend, struggled with survivors' guilt and questions about whether she could have done something to prevent his disappearance. She eventually became a social worker, dedicating her career to helping families in crisis situations. "Marcus's disappearance changed all of us," said Tommy Rodriguez, who had been Marcus's best friend and teammate. "It made us realize how quickly someone you love can be taken away, and how important it is to cherish the time you have with the people who matter to you." The case also had broader implications for safety and security at public events in rural Texas. The Brazos County Rodeo and similar events implemented enhanced security measures, including expanded camera coverage, better lighting in parking areas, and improved communication systems for reporting suspicious activity. As the years passed, Marcus Thompson's disappearance became one of those legendary unsolved cases that haunted everyone who had worked on it. Sheriff Wheeler, who retired in 2012, kept a copy of Marcus's case file on his desk until his final day in office. Agent Ross continued to review the case periodically throughout her career, hoping that new forensic techniques or investigative approaches might reveal overlooked clues. "There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think about Marcus Thompson," Sheriff Wheeler said in a 2015 interview. "In 30 years of law enforcement, I'd never encountered a case where someone could simply vanish so completely without leaving any trace of what happened to them." The passage of time brought changes to Bryan, Texas, and the people who had known Marcus. The high school retired his football jersey number 12 and created a memorial display in the school's trophy case. The local newspaper ran anniversary stories about his disappearance each July, keeping his memory alive in the community consciousness. However, as the 10th anniversary of Marcus's disappearance approached in 2016, even his most dedicated supporters began to acknowledge that the chances of finding him alive were diminishing. The FBI had reclassified his case from missing person to suspected homicide, reflecting the statistical reality that someone who had been missing for a decade was unlikely to be found alive. But Linda Thompson refused to give up hope. She continued to maintain Marcus's bedroom exactly as he had left it, with his football trophies, college acceptance letters, and rodeo ribbons still displayed on his desk. She monitored missing persons databases, social media platforms, and online forums where people shared information about unsolved cases. "I knew in my heart that Marcus was still alive," Linda would later explain. "I couldn't prove it, and I couldn't explain it, but a mother knows. I knew that someday, somehow, I would see my son again." Her faith would prove to be remarkably prescient. 18 years after Marcus Thompson disappeared from a Texas rodeo, his face would appear on a promotional flyer for a Las Vegas casino, setting in motion a chain of events that would finally reveal the truth about one of Texas's most baffling missing persons cases. The discovery would prove that Marcus had indeed survived his disappearance, but the circumstances of his new life would be more shocking and complex than anyone could have imagined. The teenager who had vanished while pursuing his dreams of bull-riding glory had somehow transformed into a man living under an assumed identity in one of America's most transient cities. The revelation would answer the question of what happened to Marcus Thompson, but it would also raise new questions about identity, choice, and the sometimes blurry line between victim and voluntary participant in one's own disappearance. The search for Marcus Thompson would become one of the most extensive and well-documented missing persons investigations in Texas history. Over the course of 18 years, it would consume thousands of hours of law enforcement time, generate more than 10,000 tips from the public, and span multiple states as investigators pursued every possible lead in their quest to determine what had happened to the promising young athlete who had vanished from the Brazos County Rodeo. Special Agent Catherine Ross of the FBI had worked hundreds of missing persons cases during her 20-year career, But the Marcus Thompson investigation would become her most challenging and personally invested case. From the moment she arrived in Bryan, Texas, in July 2006, Agent Ross recognized that this disappearance was unlike the typical runaway or family abduction cases that comprise the majority of missing children reports. Everything about Marcus Thompson's background and the circumstances of his disappearance suggested foul play. Agent Ross would later write in her case memoir. He had no history of rebellious behavior, no conflicts with family or friends, no involvement with drugs or criminal activity. He was literally 2 weeks away from starting his college football career. There was simply no logical reason for him to disappear voluntarily. The FBI's investigation began with a comprehensive analysis of the Brazos County Rodeo itself, examining whether Marcus might have been specifically targeted by someone who knew his plans to compete that evening. This line of inquiry led investigators to interview hundreds of people who had been involved with the rodeo, including competitors, staff, vendors, and regular attendees. The rodeo circuit in Texas was a tight-knit community where many of the same people traveled from event to event throughout the summer season. FBI agents attended rodeos across the state, showing Marcus's photograph and asking whether anyone had seen him or noticed anyone suspicious at the Brazos County event. This investigation revealed several concerning patterns. Over the previous 5 years, there had been at least 6 unexplained disappearances of young people associated with rodeo events across Texas and neighboring states. While the circumstances varied, all involved individuals between the ages of 16 and 22 who had vanished during or immediately after rodeo competitions. We started to see what might have been a pattern of predatory behavior, specifically targeting young people involved in rodeo culture, Agent Ross explained. These weren't random disappearances. Someone appeared to be deliberately selecting victims from this specific community. However, despite extensive investigation, the FBI was unable to establish definitive connections between the cases. Each disappearance had unique circumstances, and no physical evidence linked them together. The theory of a serial predator targeting rodeo participants remained speculative rather than proven. The investigation into the mysterious white van observed at the Brazos County Rodeo proved more promising initially. Enhanced analysis of the security footage using newly available digital enhancement techniques revealed partial views of what appeared to be commercial lettering on the van's side panels. However, the image quality remained too poor to read the text clearly. FBI technical specialists created dozens of enhanced versions of the footage, using different digital filters and enhancement algorithms to try to extract readable information from the blurry images. The best reconstruction suggested the van might have had maintenance or transport written on its side, but the evidence was too uncertain to be useful for identification purposes. The Bureau issued a nationwide BOLO, be on the lookout, alert for white panel vans with commercial markings that might match the vehicle seen at the rodeo. The alert generated over 1,000 responses from law enforcement agencies across the country, but investigation of each reported vehicle failed to produce any connection to Marcus's disappearance. Meanwhile, the Thompson family had become the public face of the search for their missing son. Robert and Linda Thompson appeared on television news programs, spoke at press conferences, and traveled to other states to publicize Marcus's case and seek information from the public. Their efforts were coordinated through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which provided resources for creating and distributing missing person flyers, maintaining a dedicated website about Marcus's case, and connecting the family with other parents of missing children who could provide emotional support and practical advice. Robert and Linda Thompson were extraordinary advocates for their son, said Rebecca Martinez, a case coordinator with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They understood that keeping Marcus's story in the public eye was crucial for generating new leads and keeping pressure on law enforcement agencies to continue investigating. The Thompsons' advocacy efforts had several significant impacts on Marcus's case. Their media appearances generated thousands of additional tips, many of which provided new avenues for investigation. Their work with other families of missing children led to the sharing of investigative strategies and resources. Most importantly, their persistence ensured that Marcus's case remained a priority for law enforcement agencies long after it might otherwise have been relegated to inactive status. One of the most promising developments in the case came in 2008, 2 years after Marcus's disappearance, when a construction worker in Houston reported finding personal items that might have belonged to him. The items, discovered during demolition of an abandoned warehouse, included a Texas A&M University decal, a football team schedule, and a rodeo program from the 2006 Brazos County Rodeo. FBI forensic specialists conducted extensive analysis of these items, including DNA testing and fingerprint examination. While the DNA results were inconclusive due to environmental degradation, the fingerprint analysis revealed partial matches to Marcus Thompson on 2 of the items. Finding those items in Houston was significant because it suggested Marcus might have been taken to a major metropolitan area rather than remaining in rural Texas, Agent Ross explained. Houston's size and transient population would have made it an ideal place for someone to disappear permanently. The discovery prompted a massive search effort in Houston, involving local police, FBI agents, and volunteer search teams. The investigation expanded to include all abandoned buildings in the industrial area where the items had been found, homeless encampments where Marcus might have been held or taken refuge, and hospitals where he might have been treated if he had been injured. However, despite weeks of intensive searching, no additional evidence related to Marcus Thompson was discovered in Houston. The investigation eventually concluded that while the items might have belonged to Marcus, their presence in the abandoned warehouse didn't necessarily indicate that he had been there personally. The items could have been discarded by his abductor or could have arrived at the location through other means. The Houston lead marked the last major development in the case for several years. By 2010, 4 years after Marcus's disappearance, the active investigation had been scaled back significantly. Agent Ross and her team continued to follow up on tips and leads, but resources had been redirected to more recent cases with better prospects for resolution. However, the Thompson family refused to accept that the search for their son was winding down. In 2011, they hired private investigator David Chen, a former FBI agent who specialized in cold case missing persons investigations. Chen brought a fresh perspective to the case and access to investigative resources that weren't available to law enforcement agencies. When I took on the Marcus Thompson case, I approached it from a completely different angle than the FBI had used, Chen explained. Instead of focusing on the circumstances of his disappearance, I concentrated on where he might have gone and how he might be living if he had survived. Chen's investigation was based on the theory that Marcus might have been taken by human traffickers who specialized in providing new identities to people who wanted to disappear from their previous lives. This theory suggested that Marcus might be alive, but living under an assumed identity, possibly unaware that his family was searching for him or unable to contact them due to threats or coercion. This approach led Chen to investigate networks of document forgers, identity theft operations, and underground communities where people lived off the grid. He traveled to major cities across the United States, visiting homeless shelters, employment agencies that hired undocumented workers, and communities where people with questionable backgrounds could blend in anonymously. Chen's investigation revealed a disturbing underworld of people who had disappeared from their previous lives, sometimes voluntarily and sometimes as victims of criminal operations. While he didn't find Marcus Thompson, he did assist in resolving several other missing persons cases and provided valuable intelligence to law enforcement agencies about human trafficking networks. David Chen's work opened our eyes to possibilities we hadn't considered, Agent Ross admitted. The idea that Marcus might be alive but unable to contact his family was both hopeful and terrifying. It meant he might still be found, but it also suggested he might be in a situation where he couldn't seek help. The case received renewed attention in 2013, when advances in facial recognition technology allowed investigators to compare Marcus's photograph with images from surveillance cameras in major cities across the United States. The FBI partnered with technology companies to scan millions of images from security cameras, driver's license databases, and social media platforms. The facial recognition project generated hundreds of potential matches, each of which required individual investigation. FBI agents and local law enforcement officers followed up on matches in cities from Seattle to Miami, interviewing people who bore physical resemblances to Marcus and investigating whether any of them might be the missing teenager. The facial recognition technology was promising, but it also demonstrated how difficult it is to find someone who doesn't want to be found, Agent Ross noted. We investigated dozens of matches that seemed promising initially, but turned out to be false leads. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the facial recognition project was the number of times it raised the Thompson family's hopes only to dash them again. Linda Thompson received phone calls about potential matches in Chicago, Phoenix, Denver, and other cities. Each time, she and Robert would travel to the location, only to discover that the person in question was not their son. Every phone call about a potential sighting was like reliving Marcus's disappearance all over again, Linda Thompson explained. We would get so hopeful, start imagining what it would be like to see him again, and then we'd be devastated when it turned out to be someone else. Despite the emotional toll, the Thompson family continued to pursue every lead and maintain their advocacy efforts. They updated Marcus's missing person website annually, adding age progression photographs that showed what he might look like as he grew older. They attended conferences for families of missing persons, sharing their experiences and learning from others who faced similar challenges. The case also benefited from periodic reviews by new investigators who brought fresh perspectives to the evidence. In 2015, Detective Maria Santos from the Brazos County Sheriff's Department was assigned to conduct a comprehensive cold case review of Marcus's disappearance. Detective Santos, who had joined the Sheriff's Department after Marcus's disappearance, approached the case without the preconceptions that might have influenced the original investigators. She re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined physical evidence using updated forensic techniques, and explored investigative angles that had been overlooked or inadequately pursued. When I reviewed the Marcus Thompson case, I was struck by how thoroughly it had been investigated initially, Detective Santos said. Agent Ross and her team had done excellent work. But I also noticed some areas where new technology or different approaches might yield additional information. Detective Santos's review led to several new developments. Updated DNA analysis of evidence from Marcus's equipment bag revealed genetic material from an unknown individual, suggesting that someone else had handled his belongings after he abandoned or lost them. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database, but no matches were found. Additionally, Detective Santos organized a new search of the area around the Brazos County Fairgrounds, using ground-penetrating radar and other advanced search technologies that hadn't been available in 2006. The search revealed several buried objects, but none proved to be related to Marcus's disappearance. Perhaps most significantly, Detective Santos's investigation uncovered new witness testimony about the night Marcus disappeared. A former carnival worker who had been afraid to come forward in 2006 contacted the Sheriff's Department in 2016 to report that he had seen a young man matching Marcus's description being forced into a white van in the fairgrounds parking area. The witness, a man named Jimmy Rodriguez, had been working illegally at the carnival and was afraid that talking to police would result in his deportation, Detective Santos explained. By 2016, his immigration status had been resolved and he felt comfortable providing information about what he had witnessed. Rodriguez's testimony was both compelling and frustrating. He described seeing a struggle between a young man and two older men near a white van around 8 p.m. on the night Marcus disappeared. However, the incident had occurred in a poorly lit area of the parking lot, and Rodriguez couldn't provide detailed descriptions of the individuals involved or the van's license plate number. Rodriguez's account was consistent with our theory about what had happened to Marcus, but it didn't provide enough specific information to advance the investigation significantly, Detective Santos noted. It confirmed that Marcus had likely been abducted, but it didn't tell us who had taken him or where he might have been taken. The testimony did prompt a renewed effort to identify the white van seen at the rodeo. Investigators used enhanced computer modeling to analyze the vehicle's dimensions and characteristics based on the security footage and Rodriguez's description. This analysis suggested the van was likely a Ford Econoline or similar model manufactured between 1992 and 2005. However, even with this additional information, identifying the specific van proved impossible. Thousands of white panel vans matching that description had been registered in Texas and surrounding states during the relevant time period, and many had changed ownership multiple times or had been destroyed in the intervening years. As the case approached its 10th anniversary in 2016, media outlets across Texas revisited Marcus Thompson's disappearance. The anniversary coverage generated a new wave of tips and potential sightings, but none led to significant developments in the investigation. The milestone also prompted reflection on the case's impact on the Bryan community and the Thompson family. Marcus's high school had established a memorial scholarship in his name, and the annual Brazos County Rodeo continued to honor his memory with a moment of silence during the bull riding competition. Marcus Thompson's disappearance changed our community forever, said Bryan High School principal Dr. Janet Williams. It made us all more aware of how precious and fragile our young people are and how important it is to watch out for each other. For the Thompson family, the 10th anniversary was a time of both grief and renewed determination. Robert and Linda Thompson organized a memorial service that drew hundreds of people from their community, including many of Marcus's former classmates who had gone on to graduate from college, start careers, and begin families of their own. Seeing Marcus's friends living the life he should have had was both heartbreaking and inspiring, Linda Thompson said. It reminded us why it was so important to keep searching for him and to never give up hope that he might still be alive somewhere. The anniversary also marked the launch of a new phase in the search for Marcus. The Thompson family partnered with a non-profit organization called Find Our Missing to create a national database of age progression photographs and missing person information that could be cross-referenced with social media platforms and other online resources. This digital approach to searching for Marcus represented a significant evolution from the traditional methods that had been used since his disappearance. Instead of relying primarily on law enforcement agencies and traditional media, the new strategy harnessed the power of social media and crowdsourcing to extend the search for Marcus to potentially millions of people across the country. Social media had changed everything about how missing persons cases could be investigated, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, a criminologist who studied the Thompson case. By 2016, it was possible for a single photograph or piece of information to reach more people in a day than traditional media could reach in months. The digital search strategy would prove to be remarkably prescient. While it didn't immediately locate Marcus Thompson, it established the technological and social media infrastructure that would eventually lead to the discovery that would finally resolve his case 18 years after his disappearance. In Las Vegas, Nevada, a city that specialized in reinvention and second chances, a man who had been living under an assumed identity for nearly 2 decades was about to make a mistake that would reconnect him with a past he thought he had successfully escaped. The mistake would come in the form of a photograph taken for a casino promotional flyer that would be seen by someone who recognized a face that had been missing from Texas since 2006. On the morning of March 15, 2024, Jessica Martinez was sitting in her Houston office, scrolling through her email, when she opened a message that would finally solve one of Texas's most enduring missing persons mysteries. Jessica, now 35 years old and working as a social worker specializing in human trafficking cases, had never stopped thinking about her high school boyfriend Marcus Thompson, who had disappeared 18 years earlier from the Brazos County Rodeo. The email had been forwarded to her by a colleague who worked with a non-profit organization that tracked missing persons cases. It contained a single attachment, a promotional flyer for the Mirage Casino in Las Vegas, advertising their upcoming Texas Hold'em Champions tournament. Featured prominently on the flyer was a photograph of a casino dealer identified as Mike Torres, but Jessica recognized the face immediately as Marcus Thompson. I stared at that photograph for probably 10 minutes before I could even process what I was seeing, Jessica would later recall. The man in the picture was older, he had different hair, he looked like he'd lived a hard life, but I knew those eyes, I knew that smile. It was definitely Marcus. The photograph showed a man in his mid-30s wearing a casino dealer's uniform, standing behind a poker table with chips and cards arranged in front of him. His sandy brown hair had darkened and receded slightly, and he appeared to have gained some weight, but his distinctive blue eyes and facial bone structure were unmistakably those of the teenager who had vanished from Texas in 2006. Jessica immediately called the FBI's missing persons hotline and was connected to Agent Catherine Ross, who was now a supervisory special agent but had never stopped working Marcus Thompson's case. Agent Ross was in a meeting in Washington, D.C., when she received Jessica's call, but she dropped everything to review the casino flyer that Jessica emailed to her. When I saw that photograph, I knew immediately that Jessica was right, Agent Ross later said. I had been looking at Marcus Thompson's face for 18 years. I knew every detail of his features, every angle of his bone structure. The man in that casino flyer was definitely Marcus Thompson, aged 18 years. Agent Ross immediately contacted the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the Nevada FBI field office to request immediate assistance in locating Mike Torres at the Mirage Casino. Within 2 hours of Jessica's phone call, FBI agents and Las Vegas police officers were walking into the Mirage to speak with casino management about one of their employees. The Mirage's Human Resources Director, Patricia Wong, was initially cooperative but became increasingly nervous when federal agents explained they were investigating a missing persons case involving one of her dealers. According to the casino's employment records, Mike Torres had been working at the Mirage for 7 years, having been hired in 2017 with apparently legitimate identification documents and work authorization. Torres was one of our most reliable employees, Wong explained to the investigators. He worked primarily night shifts, dealing Texas Hold'em and other poker games. He was popular with customers, never had any disciplinary issues, and had been promoted to senior dealer status just last year. However, when investigators requested to see Torres's original employment application and identification documents, they discovered several red flags that should have been caught during the hiring process. The social security number belonged to a man named Miguel Torres, who had died in Arizona in 2015. The driver's license was a sophisticated fake that had apparently passed initial scrutiny, but couldn't withstand detailed examination. It was clear that Mike Torres was a carefully constructed false identity, explained Detective Lisa Chen of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Someone had invested significant time and money in creating documentation that would allow this person to work legally and live normally in Las Vegas. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been living in Las Vegas since approximately 2010, 4 years after his disappearance from Texas. Prior to working at the Mirage, he had held jobs at several other casinos and had been living in a modest apartment complex near the Las Vegas Strip. Neighbors described him as quiet and private, but friendly when approached. When FBI agents and Las Vegas police arrived at Marcus's apartment on the evening of March 15th, they found him preparing for his shift at the Mirage. According to the police report, Marcus initially denied his identity and insisted he was Mike Torres. But when confronted with childhood photographs and specific details about his life in Texas, he broke down and admitted who he really was. The moment he saw his high school graduation picture, he just collapsed, Agent Ross, who had flown to Las Vegas that afternoon, described. 18 years of living a lie just fell away, and he became the scared 17-year-old kid who had disappeared from that rodeo. Marcus's first words after admitting his identity were to ask about his parents. When agents assured him that Robert and Linda Thompson were alive and had never stopped searching for him, he wept for nearly an hour before he was able to explain what had happened to him on July 15, 2006. The story Marcus told was both more complex and more tragic than investigators had imagined. On the evening of his disappearance, Marcus had indeed been abducted from the Brazos County Rodeo, but not by random criminals or serial predators. He had been taken by human traffickers working for an organization that specialized in providing young people to wealthy clients who paid enormous sums for companions who could never report their abuse or seek help. Marcus was specifically targeted because of his background, Agent Ross explained. He was intelligent, attractive, physically fit, and came from a stable family, exactly the type of victim that commanded the highest prices in human trafficking networks. According to Marcus's account, he had been drugged and transported from Texas to a compound in Nevada, where he was held with approximately 20 other young people, all of whom had been abducted from various locations across the Southwest. The compound operated as a training facility where victims were psychologically conditioned and prepared for sale to clients. They told us that our families thought we were dead, that there was no point in trying to escape because we could never go home. Marcus explained to investigators. They showed us fake newspaper articles about our own memorial services, convinced us that we had been declared legally dead and that no one was looking for us anymore. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and effective. Victims were gradually broken down through isolation, threats against their families, and carefully controlled information that made them believe escape was impossible. Those who resisted were subjected to physical abuse and psychological torture that served as examples to the others. Marcus spent 3 years at the Nevada compound, from 2006 to 2009, during which time he was sold to various clients for weekends or longer periods. The experiences he endured during this time left him with severe PTSD and a complete loss of faith in his ability to return to his previous life. By the time I had been there for 2 years, I believed I was dead to my family, Marcus told investigators. I had been so completely brainwashed that I couldn't imagine any scenario where I could go home and be the son they remembered. In 2009, the compound was raided by federal agents investigating a different case, but Marcus and several other victims weren't rescued because they were with clients at the time of the raid. When they returned to find the compound abandoned, they faced a choice: try to return to their previous lives or create new identities and attempt to start over. I was too ashamed and traumatized to go home, Marcus explained. I convinced myself that my parents were better off thinking I was dead than knowing what had happened to me. I thought I was protecting them from the truth. With the help of other escaped victims, Marcus obtained false identification documents and made his way to Las Vegas, a city where people with questionable backgrounds could blend in and start over. He worked various jobs under different names until 2017, when he felt secure enough to establish the Mike Torres identity and seek steady employment at the Mirage. Las Vegas was perfect for someone like me, Marcus said. It's a city full of people running from something, people who don't ask too many questions about your past. I could be anonymous and normal, and nobody cared where I came from. But during his years in Las Vegas, Marcus had gradually healed from his trauma with the help of therapy and support groups for trafficking victims. He had formed relationships, though he had never married or had children, and had built a stable life working in the casino industry. However, he had never contacted his family in Texas because he remained convinced that they were better off without him. He had occasionally searched for news about his parents online, but had deliberately avoided learning details about their ongoing efforts to find him. I knew they had been looking for me initially, but I assumed they had eventually given up and moved on with their lives, Marcus explained. I thought I was a ghost from their past, and that the best thing I could do was stay dead. Udo, the discovery that his parents had never stopped searching for him, that they had dedicated 18 years of their lives to finding him, was overwhelming for Marcus. When Agent Ross showed him photographs of the memorial scholarship established in his name, the age progression photos his parents had commissioned, and the missing person website they had maintained for nearly 2 decades, he realized the magnitude of the pain his absence had caused. The reunion between Marcus Thompson and his parents took place on March 18, 2024, at the FBI field office in Las Vegas. Robert and Linda Thompson had flown to Nevada as soon as they received word that their son had been found alive. The meeting was supervised by FBI agents and mental health professionals who specialized in trafficking recovery cases. When I saw Marcus walk into that room, it was like watching someone return from the dead, Linda Thompson later said. He was taller, older, obviously different from the 17-year-old boy I remembered, but he was my son. After 18 years, my baby was alive and safe. The initial reunion was emotional but challenging. Marcus struggled with guilt and shame about his disappearance and the pain he had caused his family. Robert and Linda struggled to understand how their son could have been alive for 18 years without contacting them, even after he had escaped his captors. It took several days of family counseling sessions before we could really communicate, Robert Thompson explained. Marcus had been so traumatized and brainwashed that he genuinely believed he was protecting us by staying away. We had to help him understand that we loved him unconditionally, and that nothing that had happened to him was his fault. The psychological professionals working with the family explained that Marcus's behavior was typical of long-term trafficking victims. The combination of trauma, shame, and systematic psychological manipulation often prevented victims from seeking help or returning to their previous lives, even when opportunities arose. Marcus's case illustrates why human trafficking is such a devastating crime, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, a psychologist who specialized in trafficking recovery. The psychological damage often persists long after the physical captivity ends, preventing victims from reclaiming their lives and reconnecting with their support systems. The investigation into the trafficking organization that had held Marcus expanded rapidly once he began cooperating with federal authorities. His detailed accounts of the Nevada compound, the people who had run it, and the clients who had purchased victims provided crucial intelligence for ongoing federal investigations into human trafficking networks. Marcus was able to identify several other victims who had been held with him, some of whom were still missing and whose families had never stopped searching for them. His cooperation led to the reopening of cold cases across multiple states and the identification of trafficking routes and methods that had previously been unknown to law enforcement. Marcus's information was invaluable for our understanding of how sophisticated trafficking operations work, Agent Ross explained. His detailed accounts helped us identify patterns and connections that we had missed in previous investigations. The case also revealed serious gaps in the systems designed to identify and assist trafficking victims. The fact that Marcus had been able to live and work legally in Las Vegas for years, using false identification, raised questions about employment verification processes and the effectiveness of databases designed to catch identity fraud. Marcus's ability to maintain a false identity for so long highlighted weaknesses in our systems that needed to be addressed, said Detective Chen. His case became a catalyst for improvements in how we screen for fake documents and identify people who might be trafficking victims. The reunion between Marcus and his childhood friends was equally emotional and complex. Jessica Martinez, whose recognition of his photograph had triggered the investigation, was among the first to see him after his parents. Their meeting was bittersweet, as both had to reconcile the teenagers they had been with the adults they had become. Seeing Jessica again was like looking into a mirror that showed me everything I had lost, Marcus said. She had become a social worker, dedicated her career to helping people like me, while I had been hiding from the world. It made me realize how much of my life I had wasted being afraid. Marcus's former teammates from the Bryan High School football team organized a reunion that drew dozens of his former classmates. Many of them had successful careers and families, and seeing their accomplishments helped Marcus understand the life he might have had if he hadn't been abducted. It was hard to see how everyone else's lives had progressed while mine had been frozen in time, Marcus admitted, but it also gave me hope that I could still build a meaningful life, even starting over at 35. The legal aspects of Marcus's case proved complex. While he had been the victim of serious federal crimes, his use of false identification documents technically constituted identity fraud. Federal prosecutors ultimately decided not to pursue charges against Marcus, recognizing that his document fraud had been a survival mechanism rather than criminal intent. Prosecuting trafficking victims for crimes they committed as a result of their victimization would be counterproductive and unjust, explained Assistant U.S. Attorney Maria Rodriguez, who oversaw the case. Marcus's priority needed to be healing and rebuilding his life, not defending himself against criminal charges. The case attracted significant media attention when details were released to the public in April 2024. Marcus's story became a national symbol of both the devastating impact of human trafficking and the possibility of recovery and reunion even after many years. However, Marcus chose to maintain his privacy and declined most interview requests. He returned to Texas with his parents in May 2024 and began the process of rebuilding his identity and relationships. He underwent intensive therapy to address his PTSD and worked with legal advocates to restore his official identity and legal status. "I'm not ready to be a public figure or spokesperson," Marcus explained in his only public statement. I need time to heal and to rebuild my relationship with my family and my community. Maybe someday I'll be able to help other trafficking victims, but right now I need to focus on my own recovery. The Brazos County Rodeo held a special ceremony in July 2024 to celebrate Marcus's return, though he chose not to attend the event itself. Instead, the ceremony honored his recovery and the dedication of his family while raising awareness about human trafficking and the resources available to help victims. Marcus's story reminds us that we should never give up hope for missing loved ones, said Sheriff Jim Wheeler's successor, Sheriff Maria Santos. It also reminds us that trafficking victims need our compassion and support, not judgment about the choices they made to survive. The casino flyer that had triggered Marcus's discovery became an unexpected symbol of hope for other families of missing persons. The image was shared widely on social media, accompanied by stories about the importance of continuing to search for missing loved ones and the possibility that victims of trafficking might be hiding in plain sight. Marcus's case proved that social media and digital technology could be powerful tools for finding missing persons, said Rebecca Martinez from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. His photograph was seen by exactly the right person at exactly the right time, and that changed everything. As of late 2024, Marcus Thompson was slowly rebuilding his life in Texas, living with his parents while working with therapists and legal advocates to establish his new normal. He had legally reclaimed his birth name and was exploring educational and career opportunities that would allow him to start over professionally. "I lost 18 years of my life, but I've been given a second chance," Marcus said during a private interview with investigators. "I can't change what happened to me, but I can choose how I move forward from here." His parents, Robert and Linda Thompson, had finally received the answer to the question that had defined their lives for 18 years. Their son was alive, safe, and slowly healing from unimaginable trauma. "We never stopped believing that Marcus was alive, even when everyone else told us to give up hope," Linda Thompson said. "Faith and persistence brought our son home, and no family should ever stop searching for their missing loved ones." The Marcus Thompson case became a landmark in missing persons investigations, demonstrating both the long-term impact of human trafficking and the power of modern technology and social media to solve cold cases. Most importantly, it proved that even after 18 years, it was possible for missing persons to be found, families to be reunited, and victims to begin the process of reclaiming their lives. In Las Vegas, the Mirage Casino removed Mike Torres from their employee roster and began implementing enhanced background check procedures designed to identify other potential trafficking victims who might be working under false identities. The case had shown that victims could be hiding anywhere, living seemingly normal lives while carrying the invisible scars of their traumatic experiences. The white van that had been spotted at the Brazos County Rodeo in 2006 was never identified, and many of the perpetrators responsible for Marcus's trafficking remained at large. However, the information he provided to federal investigators continued to generate new leads and had already resulted in several arrests of individuals connected to trafficking networks. Marcus Thompson's story was far from over, but the 18-year mystery of his disappearance had finally been solved. The teenager who had vanished while pursuing his dreams of bull-riding glory had survived unimaginable horrors and somehow found the strength to build a new life. His discovery offered hope to thousands of other families, still searching for missing loved ones, and demonstrated that sometimes, against all odds, the impossible could become possible.